Welcome to the Muscarelle Museum of Art and our exhibition, Forever Marked by the Day. The exhibition is presented as a commemoration of the 20th anniversary of the September 11th attacks, a day that is deeply imprinted in the memories of all of us who were alive at that time. September 11th is a day that is always with us, and so in some respects, it's hard to believe that so much time has passed since that fateful day. Our exhibition arose out of a desire to pay tribute to all those who lost their lives on September 11th, but to honor them through an exhibition that looked through the lens of architecture, and specifically the architecture of the World Trade Center site in New York City over the many decades since the World Trade Center first came to be. And while focusing on New York, our exhibition is not intended to minimize what happened that day at the Pentagon or in the Pennsylvania countryside. Our exhibition begins with the original Twin Towers and works its way through to the modern remaking of Lower Manhattan. Let's start with the initial project. In the 1950s and 1960s, commerce began to move north in Manhattan, away from that traditional core, the colonial village that eventually evolved into Wall Street, and up towards Midtown. With that shift in investment and that migration north, Lower Manhattan began to feel a bit forgotten. Several prominent New Yorkers, including David Rockefeller, began to advocate for a renewal project in southern Manhattan. And he and others joined forces together and eventually partnered with the Port Authority of New York to develop a scheme for a massive remaking of southern Manhattan. The idea that emerged was to build the world's first ever World Trade Center, a center of commerce that would be dedicated to the promotion of international trade. The idea was to make it massive. The target was to build 10 million square feet of new office space, an amount that would truly transform Lower Manhattan. The Port Authority developed a list of candidates that they wanted to engage in the process, architectural firms that were prominent and had a great track record of success. Over 30 architecture firms responded to the Port Authority's request for proposal, and the committee and the Port Authority eventually selected 7 architecture firms to move further along in the competition. Among those was a real favorite of the committee, Minoru Yamasaki, who was by this point mid-career and successful in his practice as a noted and refined practitioner of modernism. Yamasaki was born in Seattle to Japanese parents, and by this point in time, he was a mid-career and very successful architect. His firm was well regarded around the world and was one that the Port Authority was interested in engaging in the project. Overall, there were 7 architecture firms selected as finalists in the competition. The committee was well versed in the works of Yamasaki. He had essentially developed a practice as a refined modernist. And when the committee sent out a letter requesting responses from each of the architects, Yamasaki's firm responded in a way that was notable by the selection committee. In his letter, Yamasaki rose to lofty levels and incorporated language that resonated deeply with the selection committee, including this quote. He said, "To be symbolic of its great purpose, of the working together in the trade of the nations of the world, it should have a sense of dignity and pride and still stand for the humanity and democratic purposes in which we in the United States believe." This was exactly what the selection committee wanted to hear. Yamasaki is eventually selected as the architect, and he begins to work through the process of developing and conceiving of a project that would incorporate 10 million square feet of office space. Well, architectural projects are very iterative. Commercial architectural projects of this scale are increasingly iterative. There are many different ways to put together 10 million square feet of office space. It can be spread across multiple buildings. It could be concentrated in several buildings. But any project ultimately intended to contain 10 million square feet is going to be iterative in its early design phases. And so Yamasaki's team worked and worked. They came up with different configurations of how they might lay out that office space. And it wasn't until the 40th iteration of their exercise that the idea for two twin monumental towers emerged from the process. What we're showing in the exhibition is a substantial amount of work from Yamasaki's effort. We have drawings from his office showing exteriors and interiors. We have photographs of some of the models he used. And in any architectural project, there are always a sequence of models. Some are large, some are small, some might incorporate the entire neighborhood and show the proposed buildings in context. We particularly like this photograph that shows just how large some models can be. We have Yamasaki up here on a ladder behind two massively scaled models of what would eventually become his project. One of the things that's very interesting about the World Trade Center site is the mechanics of its construction. When you're excavating to build foundations for two towers that when completed will simultaneously be the two tallest buildings in the world, and when you're building that underground city that will support those two towers, you generate a substantial amount of excess earth. What happened at the project at the World Trade Center site was that excess earth was dumped into the Hudson River, creating the landfill upon which today's Battery Park City is built. So the reality is, in the making of the World Trade Center site, that the Port Authority not only condemned 12 blocks for urban redevelopment, but also created about 12 new blocks in southern Manhattan by putting that landfill in the Hudson River. And today, Battery Park City is that amazing residential community that has taken several decades to develop, but now incorporates many apartment buildings, some commercial office buildings, and a beautiful promenade along the Hudson River. And so the project resulted not only in the creation of the World Trade Center, but also in the creation of a brand new neighborhood. When you combine those two together, what you have is one of the greatest downtowns in America. The Twin Towers were iconic from the outset. They were singularly emblematic of American commerce, of American power, and very proud monuments for New Yorkers and Americans alike. They were the two tallest buildings in the world. One of the things we had hoped to do in the exhibition, until we ran out of wall space, was to capture that iconic status of those original World Trade Towers. The idea that we had was to invite in people from the community to share their own personal photos of friends and family members posed with the World Trade Towers in the background. We ran out of wall space, but we did find a photograph that conveyed essentially everything we wanted to convey. And that was from the late 1980s, a meeting of world leaders in New York, President Reagan, President Gorbachev, and Vice President Bush, all discussing the future of the world, the future of the world's financial system. They're meeting in New York, and what do they choose as the backdrop to their own photograph? The World Trade Towers. We're also presenting in this gallery several photographs by the noted 20th century architectural photographer Balthasar Korab. Korab worked with many of the prominent and trend-setting architects of the 20th century, and his work helped to define what modernism actually meant. We show works by him shot across the water, from the Brooklyn Bridge, and also from uptown looking downtown at the towers. And we include several interior shots as well. Christian White is an American painter who was born in Italy. And the reason why he was born in Italy is because his father, also a prominent artist, was studying on a Prix de Rome at the American Academy at the time of his birth. And we like this painting by Christian because in a very modern way, he captures the monumentality of one of the World Trade Towers, sited right along the river in Manhattan. The next part of our story is, of course, the attacks of September 11th. We wanted to be as sensitive and delicate as we could possibly be as we presented that day. And so what you don't see in our exhibition are any buildings on fire, collapsing buildings, or certainly human casualties on the ground. We begin this section of the exhibition by bookending it with two stories told by young boys. One pictorially with some additional storyline, and another an image of what the young boy had drawn on the pavement. We have an image that focuses in on first responders, and we had a long conversation about whether or not we would include this photograph showing the extensive damage of the World Trade Center site. And in the end, we decided to show this photograph because it delivered the immensity of the rebuilding task ahead. One of our favorite photographs that we recently added to our collection here at the Muscarelle is this photograph of the Brooks Brothers store by photographer Sean Hemmerly. He took this photograph 2 days after the attacks, and so you can see recovery efforts are already underway. There's an ambulance, and of course, a lot of activity illuminated here in the early evening with the shards of the original towers wedged into the ground. We love this photograph for a couple of reasons. First of all, it's technically strong. The photographer has captured light in an internal space and also outside in the early evening with a lot of bright artificial light. That balancing is a technical competency that we really appreciate in this photograph. But we also like this photograph for its symbolism. There are, of course, most of the shirts in this Brooks Brothers store still in their racks on the shelf, and then a small number of shirts scattered across the ground. Very symbolic, we think, of the day. I like to talk about this photograph by Patrick Whitty as one that is the definition of a picture speaking 1,000 words. And I think when you look in this photograph, we all see ourselves and how we felt that day on September 11th, a day where hour after hour, our disbelief just continued to mount. We've all seen many, many photographs of people who were covered in dust and debris after the collapse of the towers. And this photograph by Don Hallisey delivers that message. And then I mentioned we bookended the exhibition with two photographs that tell the stories as seen through the eyes of young boys. And this story, told by a young boy and photographer Hayden Roger Celestin, in just a few images drawn with stone on a sidewalk, this young man has captured the essential story of September 11th. By 2000, the Port Authority realized that they were perhaps not the ideal organization to be holding the master lease over 10 million square feet of office space, and so devised a plan to hire an outside master leaseholder. Larry Silverstein, a prominent New York developer and a financial partner, entered into a competition for that master lease, and in early 2001, their partnership was awarded master lease of the World Trade Center site. Unfortunately, several months later, that master lease pertained to a site that needed to be rebuilt. In the months that followed, Silverstein began to imagine what that new World Trade Center site might become. And in order to further that conversation, he hired the internationally prominent architect Daniel Libeskind to develop a master plan for the site. As I mentioned, the idea that that central space, that space where the two towers once stood, would be sacred and preserved, had already taken firm hold. And so Libeskind's plan incorporated a crescent of towers that would ring that central space. And in that crescent of towers and in his plan, he had several key symbolic gestures. The first gesture was there would be a signature or primary tower. And his idea was that that tower would be 1,776 feet tall, 1776. He also had the idea that the site could be engineered such that light could stream in from the east between two of the subsidiary towers, specifically each year on September 11th, and that light from the east could illuminate that central memorial space between the times in the morning of 8:46 a.m., the time that the first plane hit the first tower, and 10:28 a.m., the time that the second of the two towers fell. And then there was a third symbolic gesture that Libeskind envisioned for the site, and that was that signature tower would begin to reflect that statue in the harbor, the Statue of Liberty. And so you can see in some of the models from Libeskind's office, and we have 6 of them here, of the many different iterations they worked through as a potential form exercise that tower might take. You can see in these models that gesture of the Statue of Liberty out in the harbor. And so we have in the exhibition the towers from Libeskind's office, we have a number of drawings from his office, and we have a sketchbook. Each of the drawings beginning to illuminate the powerful impact that site would ultimately have upon completion. And so with the plan for the site in place, let's move to the individual parts that now define that space. And we'll start with the memorial, that central space in the middle of the World Trade Center site. Michael Arad was a young architect on September 11th, working with the city of New York, helping to design police stations and fire stations when he was caught in the middle of the tragedies. And like many creative people around the world, he began very quickly to envision how we might memorialize what happened on September 11th. And his initial idea that he came up with just in the days following September 11th was to put 2 square voids in the shape of the footprints of the buildings out in the Hudson River. These voids constantly filling with water from the river, but never actually filling up. And he put that idea, that design, on the shelf until a year later, a competition was announced for a memorial at the World Trade Center site. And he brought that idea back out, but repositioned it in a different place. And so we have in the exhibition a model of what he submitted into that memorial competition, a competition that had over 5,000 entrants. He was selected as the designer for what would be built. And his idea was this: he replicated those 2 square voids in the shape of the footprints of the original buildings. But his idea morphed into moving the memorial into the actual footprints of where those 2 buildings had once stood. And so what we've done in this exhibition is taken apart the model he submitted into the competition to show you both his subterranean plan and also his plaza plan. Originally, his idea was to bring people into a lower level, below ground, and give them an opportunity to look through what would be square waterfalls falling 30 to 40 feet into a large reflecting pool in the shape of each of the 2 towers' original footprints, and allow from that subterranean space the ability to look through those waterfalls. That aspect of the project was cost engineered out, but the rest of his project, as conceived, was built. The committee quickly came back to him and said, "The project's outstanding, but the plaza is too austere. It needs an infusion of nature." And so he worked with a landscape architect and developed a plan for how he might articulate nature into that site. And the idea that they came up with was to line the site, to line that plaza with what they called abacus-like bands of trees. And that is eventually what was accepted by the committee and installed on the site. And you can see it in this photograph. The 2 reflecting pools, this enormous plaza with green spaces, with hardscape, and also with these lines of trees. This image by George Steinmetz from 2014. What's great about the memorial as built is that it is deeply entwined within the fabric of the city. Some of the tallest buildings in the world surround this site, but yet at the same time, the site feels separated from the city. And that separation comes from the sound of the 30 to 40 foot waterfalls that surround each of the two reflecting pools. The sound of those waterfalls push the city back away and open up the space as one for reflection and for remembering. And so what you have with these two central depressions in the bases of the reflecting pools is a feature that evokes the perfect emotional response. It's a feeling of loss. It's a feeling of infinity. It's a feeling of something never being completed. And so this combination of pushing back the city and bringing out the emotions makes this site a beautiful memorial. And so we have the September 11th Museum at the center of the site, and of course, the two reflecting pools. The names of all of the victims of September 11th, and also the earlier attack in 1993, the bombing of the World Trade Center tower, the names of all of those victims are inscribed on marble panels surrounding each of the two reflecting pools. In the end, Daniel Libeskind was not selected to build the signature tower at the site. Larry Silverstein chose instead the architect David Childs, a senior statesman architect at the world-renowned firm of Skidmore, Owings & Merrill. Childs' idea was to build a grand obelisk on the site with that very interesting architectural twist. And the twist was this: the base of the building sits square, but by the time the architecture exposes itself and moves to the top of the building rotates by 45 degrees. And Childs accomplishes this rotation with an important architectural move. Essentially, it's the combination of 8 very tall, slender triangles. 4 of them have their bases at the top and point downward, and 4 of them have their bases at the bottom and point upward. And in that combination of those 2 sets of triangles coming together, the twist is accomplished. What Childs did was, with the tower and the antenna atop, the total height came in at 1,776 feet. And so there's that Daniel Libeskind moment in the building. We have a number of interesting drawings that show how the building was conceived and where it was situated relative to the 2 reflecting pools, all from the office of Skidmore. We also have this amazing schematic from Libeskind's office. It's a combination photograph and computer-generated drawing, but it describes the site as it has become today and is planned to evolve further in the future. And so let me just explain where we are today at the World Trade Center site, this amazing concentration of space in southern Manhattan. One World Trade, the tower we just talked about by David Childs, is up and operational. 7 World Trade is up. The Performing Arts Center is currently under construction. 2 World Trade, this original design by the firm Bjarke Ingels, no longer part of the plan. 2 World Trade construction has not yet started on, but will be designed by Norman Foster's firm. The Transportation Hub by Santiago Calatrava is up and operational. 3 World Trade is up and looks almost identical to the image in this picture. 4 World Trade is up, looks almost identical to this image. And of course, the plaza and the memorial site are all operational. The final building that we're going to take a look at is the Transportation Hub, known as the Oculus, designed by the Spanish architect Santiago Calatrava. The idea for the Oculus was to replace the destroyed World Trade Center PATH train station, that very important commuter stop that brought workers from New Jersey into Lower Manhattan each day. For years, those commuters had to rely on a series of temporary underground network tunnels and also train platforms in order to complete their commutes back and forth to Lower Manhattan. But in 2015, with the opening of the Oculus, the transportation hub, their transportation was raised to a new level. Calatrava is an amazing architect and one of my favorites. And his idea for this particular train station was to create another grand public space within the city of New York, one that was reflective of those great spaces at Grand Central Station and the old Penn Station. And what you see in his architecture is typical Calatrava. This is absolutely in his lexicon. You have this great building, very sculptural, in steel and glass. Often in Calatrava's work, you see sort of a skeletal form, and this situation is no different. He always paints his steel white. And his idea was to make this a combination shopping area, much like Grand Central Station, and also a transit hub. What you see is a building that continues to expand as it comes from its peak. And even as it goes below ground, the building continues to build outward, really creating an immense platform and floor at its base. The site has always been, since September 12th, the entire site infused with patriotism. And I was in this building the week that it opened. I'm a photographer, and I remember sitting at the base. There were probably 6 or 7 people in the building at the time I was there. I had my camera propped on my knees and took a number of shots down through the empty cavern. And I remember very specifically a large American flag hanging from that balcony at one end. And that was typical of the patriotism you would see again and again at the World Trade Center site as it was redeveloped and rebuilt over the course of more than 10 years. We have a number of drawings from Calatrava's office. They're digital, which allowed us to blow them up to a larger size and give viewers an opportunity to examine them in a little bit more detail. And then we have several schematics from his office that begin to explain the site in a bit more detail. In this drawing, we see the Oculus offset from the train platforms. And this drawing begins to describe just what exactly goes on beneath the ground. And so you come into the main building, you cross under Greenwich Street and get to the train platforms. You can continue your way underground through a hallway, cross under West Street, the West Side Highway, and emerge up some escalators into Brookside Place, the shopping center at the base of the World Financial Center. We have this drawing in the exhibition because it demonstrates that the architecture of the train platforms for the PATH station follow very much Calatrava's architecture for the main building. And so you can see how they connect architecturally. Calatrava said many things about the building, but I love this quote. He said, "After many studies of the sun at the site, I oriented the central axis of the transportation hub to correspond to Libeskind's wedge of light. The result was to create a way of light on the floor of the transit hall that would be embellished by sunlight flooding in through the open skylight in the Oculus roof. The angle of the sun and the skylight coincide exactly with the position of the sun at the time of the collapse of the second tower." And so Childs delivers Libeskind's idea for a tower that's 1,776 feet tall, and Calatrava delivers on Libeskind's idea for a wedge of light through this way of light on the floor of the transit hall. We wrap up the exhibition with a tour through a number of magazine covers from the New Yorker magazine. As we were doing the research for this exhibition, one of my team members working with me, Adriano Marinazzo, came and said, "I've discovered that the original Twin Towers were featured many times on the cover of the New Yorker magazine." And he showed me some of the images and asked, "What do you think about including these in the exhibition?" And from the moment he showed me, I knew this was a great idea. And so we selected 12 covers from the New Yorker magazine that tell the story of the Twin Towers and the World Trade Center site over the course of the exhibition. And so we start in 1974. The towers opened in 1973. This cover from April is in the midst of the energy crisis, perhaps posing the question, what are we all to do, become windmills? It moves to a cover in 1978 that talks about the various neighborhoods within the island of Manhattan, perhaps separated in their own way as separate islands. A 1982 cover showing the southern tip of Manhattan, a beautiful summer day, a July issue. Don't we have a beautiful city? A 1993 cover shortly after the bombing of the World Trade Center tower. And this is how the New Yorker magazine decided to tell that story. The New Yorker magazine likes to consider itself the arbiter of culture in New York, or the United States, or the world, and has several times over the course of its publication featured a certain city at the center of a certain universe. And here they are from a cover in early 2000, the Twin Towers in the middle of the stars above. And that brings us to two very interesting covers for the magazine. This one, called Young Architects by the artist Benoit, from August of 2001, just 1 month before the attacks on September 11th. And I think this is ironic in a really incredible way to have this as a cover just 1 month before those fateful events. What we have here is perhaps a reflection of our own collective naivete on how much evil there might actually be in the world, and maybe a misunderstanding of what the future really did hold. I like to think of this particular work as depicting maybe the world at peace. In August of 2001, the world was very peaceful compared to what the world would look like on September 12th. And so we have the event, we have the attack. And for the New Yorker magazine, the attack was very personal. This was an attack on their hometown. So they struggled mightily with how to depict that on their next issue. They considered for the first time ever having a photograph on the cover, and then quickly moved away from that decision, thinking that actually no image would tell the story appropriately. And so the decision was to have simply a black cover. And then shortly before they went to publication, they modified that idea to a two-tone black cover that incorporated and depicted silhouettes of the two towers that had been destroyed. To me, this is a masterpiece. It evokes everything that the New Yorker magazine was trying to evoke and the editorial staff there wanted to deliver. It shows our loss, it shows our grieving, and it shows our deep, deep feeling of mourning. And then we move through a sequence of covers that mark various anniversaries. And so here we are in September of 2002 with an image showing Lower Manhattan. The towers would have been about right here. And so what this image is really doing is looking at the heavens. It's looking up to all those who were lost. The second anniversary in September of 2003. This is one of my favorite works in the exhibition. If you remember Kennedy, when he went to Berlin after the Soviets had separated and segregated the city, and he said, "Ich bin ein Berliner." This is that Kennedy moment. This is telling the story, we are all twin buildings, we are all twin towers. Of course, the twin towers are no longer here, but this is the way we remember. The third anniversary, September of 2004, a gentleman in his Midtown office, he's looking south. I don't see you. Oh, I do see you, and I remember you. And the 10th anniversary in September of 2011, this beautiful work You're no longer with us, but you're reflected in everything we are. And then we close the exhibition with this cover from 2014, showing what that World Trade Center site had become. That central site for patriotism, for remembering, and for coming to mourn all those who had been lost. It's a site that is forever active. There are people here at all times of every day, sometimes large crowds, sometimes smaller crowds. But this is a space within a city that has constant habitation. And it really shows what people come to do, to pay honor and respect to those who lost their lives on September 11th. Thank you for joining me as we walk through Forever Marked by the Day.